Hi, my name is Neha. I'm so glad that you're here today. You already know that I'm going to say welcome and good morning. And I wanted to thank you for making the trek out here today on a Saturday to Github. And I'm really excited about being at PearConf with you today to talk about our new understandings of best practices and challenges that we're facing. So, I've been doing a lot of reflecting over the past 8 months because I went from being a software engineer at Pivotal Labs to enabling clients in agile extreme programming to becoming an engineering manager at GitHub Desktop and not necessarily having all of those agile extreme programming practices in place. So this is kind of like a little adventure that we're going to go on and we're going to talk about it. But I'm going to go into that in a second. If you're looking for my one-line summary, it feels kind of like I've done a complete 360. And I'm saying a 360 and not a 180 because somehow, even after all of the changes and the differences between the teams, I feel like I'm facing the same direction and I have the same beliefs, but somehow I've shifted the fundamentals in which I think are important. So, consequently, I'm employing a lot of the same ways of thinking that I had when I was enabling teams at Pivotal Labs when I'm working right now on GitHub Desktop. So, of course, I've just had to make a few perspective shifts, and to get to that point, that's like what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Before I share that, I want to share a little bit about my personal life. So I'm from South Florida. Is there anyone in the audience from South Florida? Okay, no, that's okay, because I'm here to teach you, right? So I'm going to share a little bit about South Florida. As a South Floridian, I grew up snorkeling along the third largest and most visited reef in the world. It's the Great Florida Reef, and specifically there's like one chunk of coral reef, and it's called Molasses Reef. And so that was the first reef that I ever snorkeled in front of. I've gone many other times. And so I have these incredible memories of swimming through these blurry schools of fish that I didn't have contacts at the time, and I had glasses, so it was very blurry. And I was trying to hold my cool because I swam over these open-mouthed barracudas, which are very scary. And I think on my first trip when I was in 5th grade, I counted 18 barracudas, so that was really exhilarating and also really terrifying. The interesting thing is that as I've traveled all around the world and I've snorkeled, I've seen photos, I've seen the exact same coral reef that I've grown up with all over the world. And that's because coral reefs grow under very specific conditions. And you're going to learn today. So these conditions are that they're like continuous, clear, clean, warm salt water, lots of sunlight, apparently 10,000 years of time, and with that you have these underwater life, like islands of life everywhere. And so before transitioning to my current role, can you see all my notifications? Oh, I know how to do that. This one I can do. Okay. All right, so before transitioning to my current role, this seemed like everything I knew about teams, too. If you pre-select the perfect conditions for an agile team, you'd have something similar, right? You'd have continuous integration, you'd have clear priorities, you'd have clean user-centric design, you'd have, and this is like where the metaphor is kind of falling apart, warm empathy, yeah? Saltwater retrospectives, because sometimes you have to healthy cry, and lots of sunlit pair programming. I had to fit pair programming in here somewhere. So, and of course, don't forget 10,000 years of time. So, with these conditions, it's pretty clear that you would have this above water of life island. And so I kind of wanted to reflect what are the two ecosystems that I was living in. So here's our pretty picture. When I was a software engineer at Pivotal Labs, which is my old world, I worked with a co-located team that operated on the same hours. Sometimes we would just make sure that we coordinated bathroom breaks because it's more time efficient to do so. We paired 8 hours a day, which was 40 hours a week. And every time we came onto a project, we strongly requested PM resources, design resources, and we tried to start off after our initial meeting. I'm trying not to use all of our buzzword words. So after our initial meeting, we tried to have a prioritized backlog. That's a buzzword. I can't get around that one. And have planning meetings. So a planning meeting at the beginning of the week and a retrospective at the end of the week. So these are the ideal perfect conditions. So the team I'm on right now, GitHub Desktop, is a little different. When I joined, the 3 engineers, the individual contributors on the team, were in Europe, US, and Australia. So they kind of covered 8-hour shifts completely apart. So it was almost perfectly not overlapping, right? So we can nix the co-located team. We can nix the pairing 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. Not going to happen. At the time when we started, we had no PM resources, and we had a shared design resource. So nix that one too. Our project was open source, and open source also means that your backlog is open to the entire world. So prioritized backlog, no, not so easy. And I remember asking about planned meetings, and my coworker patiently explained to me that we can't have a meeting because someone's going to be up either at 11 p.m. or 5 a.m., and that wasn't going to be me. So, all right, well, this is our world right now, and that was my world when I joined the team. I had all of these principles that I held really close to me, and all of a sudden they were kind of taken away, and I had to reassess what was going on. GitHub didn't have the traditional conditions that I've known to be ideal for a team to grow and operate at its optimal pace. But the thing is that the desktop team is a thriving and growing ecosystem. The user base has grown from scratch after releasing Desktop Electron in the last year. The open source community was growing. The team was in good standing with GitHub as a business, and the team was delivering user-facing features. Now, that's a pretty good starting ground, right? Those are good things. Those are great leading indicators. And my favorite part was, just how I had experienced at Pivotal Labs, the team was respectful, kind, and most of all, pretty happy. So I've been on all kinds of teams, but this was new to me, this whole really liking the way the conditions are, and this entire culture that GitHub brings with the remote culture and kind of being geographically diverse. It was new and it felt different to me. So this is what I've been thinking about and reflecting on for the past 8 months. What are these ingredients to a thriving ecosystem, and how do I work together with my team to make sure that desktop is even more beautiful and thriving by introducing the right agile principles at the right time? The catch is that I've never seen this ecosystem before, so how am I going to know what works? Turns out that coral reefs have their own set of anomalies. So normally the temperature range for coral reefs is pretty set and constant. It doesn't really have a high range. But I have 2 exceptions that I wanted to share with you today. This is the northernmost reef found in the world. It's in Japan, and it's called Tsushima Island Reef, and it's about 13 degrees Fahrenheit colder than the determined lowest ideal condition for a reef. So I found this pretty fascinating. It's especially pretty if you ignore the coral bleaching, which I'll explain what it is later, so don't worry about that. This is another reef, so this is in the Red Sea, and it's off the coast of Egypt, and it's called Zaki's Reef. And it has extremely high salinities and experiences temperature fluctuations of about 60 degrees Fahrenheit seasonally. So we don't like that. Corals are even more sensitive. They don't like that either. But somehow there's this thriving coral ecosystem in Egypt. So if these coral reefs that need ideal conditions can thrive in adverse conditions, then clearly teams can survive adverse conditions too. I just had to shift my perspective in order to understand what those conditions are. One of my eye-opening moments was when I started to zoom out from looking at my tiny team and looking a little bit more at the big picture. It's easy to focus on the narrow short-term haves and have-nots. And for example, those haves and have-nots, right? No co-located team and unlimited, unprioritized backlog open to the open source community, right? Completely new to me, completely terrifying. I used to see these as a sign that there's just too much work. Why bother? Why would I join this team? But when you join a team, you can't just leave it. It's not like a client engagement, right? So I've decided to focus a little bit less on the haves and have-nots and a little bit more on the gives and takes with the unique characteristics of our team. And I know that's a lot of jargon, so I'm going to show you. Okay, so let's take these two unique characteristics, right? Maintaining an open source repository and having a geographically distributed team. So maintaining an open source team does mean that you're going to have you're never going to have that fully groomed and cleaned backlog. But it also means that you get user feedback daily and more, right? So people are willing to test your features in your beta version. You get like a healthy stack traces and bug screenshots, and people will often help triage issues for you and help find the right solutions. And if you work with the community well, then the community will help solve the problems with you in the form of a pull request, right? This is like a new advantage that I had never seen before or been able to experience. I've always had my mindset around your team is where you get all of your productivity out, and now you can reach out to the entire community. Coincidentally, this becomes even more advantageous with a geographically distributed team. So with a team pulling consecutive 8-hour shifts around the clock, our response times for issues and pull requests have been amazingly low, and actually it's one of the lowest among the GitHub client application teams. Our geographically diverse team also means that we have a very different cultural understandings, both in the US and outside in Sweden and Australia. So because we all have these different cultural norms, we always have to give people the benefit of the doubt. We assume positive intent, and we keep each other in check, especially when it comes to interpretations and resolutions. I really like this, and I feel like there's this really interesting symbiosis between the open source community and being geographically diverse, and I found that symbiosis and link fascinating. So the community has been a bedrock for the team to grow on, and vice versa. And I'll have you know that coral reefs actually grow in a similar symbiotic fashion. So if you see the vibrant colors of a coral reef, you're not actually looking at the coral. You're looking at the coral polyps are actually like these building blocks of the coral reef, and they're completely white. And so they build on this like rock-like skeleton. So the colors are actually from this like tiny algae that live inside the coral, and they provide oxygen to the coral. And so I kind of love this because I think of this as like our little tiny algae team that's growing within the community's skeleton to attract new users and fish and a new diverse community. So, as you reflect on your own team, instead of focusing on what you have and what you don't have, I want you to think about the unique parts of your team that, while might seem initially challenging, provide something new to your ecosystem that you've never had or gotten to achieve before. So my question for you is, do any parts of your teams coexist in a symbiotic relationship with some other advantages and characteristics? So it's just for you to think. Okay, it's time for some lessons that I've learned. So if there's one thing that's humbled me the most and matured me unexpectedly over my last 8 months, it's been the virtue of patience. If any of you in the audience know me, you know me that I'm not very patient. I want it now, I want it yesterday. And specifically, when I say the virtue of patience, I mean having patience for myself, but also begging for patience from my team. So when I first joined the team, I kind of saw all of these changes that I wanted to make, I wanted to fix everything. And I say fix in quotes because I expected that the perfect truth was what I thought was perfect. Unfortunately, this is a well-intended but also close-minded attitude. We don't always know what's best, and it helps to take a step back and observe the environment before jumping to conclusions about what needs to change. So this is where it gets even more cringeworthy, right? Let's talk about one of those times. Everyone loves a war story, right? So one of my not successful attempts at change was kind of requiring pair programming between teammates. If you know me, you know I love pair programming. I write about it, I've done talks about it, I've done tutorials around it. So this is like my thing. This is, of course, it would be intuitive for me to require this for my team. Well, bringing in pair programming, which I found beneficial to me, resulted in consequences that I hadn't anticipated. With a geographically distributed team, I had introduced new schedule constraints, a less optimal work-life balance, and occasional pairing without intent or direction. So I was warned by my team also, right? So they told me that it's like hard requirements like this haven't worked in the past. And I didn't believe them. I said, just try again. And I knew better because I knew that pairing takes time and intention, and you have to set it up right. But surprise, surprise, as a manager, I got really busy, and I didn't have the energy or bandwidth to fully enable pair programming, so things didn't go that well. If I'd listened a little bit more, if I'd asked a few more questions before prescribing a solution, maybe things would have gone better. It's okay, I'll pick you up in a second. Okay, so before we do, today we're going to talk about a lot of problems, experiences, and solutions. So this is my reminder to myself and for you, if you're willing, to ask more questions about others' experiences, to listen more, and to understand the conditions that led to these experiences before jumping into solutioning. Otherwise, we risk introducing sudden change, and that can have catastrophic consequences. For corals, these catastrophic consequences come in the form of coral bleaching. Has anyone heard of coral bleaching before? Yeah, okay, most of you. Okay, so I'm going to go really quickly about this. But basically, this happens when the water temperature gets extreme too quickly, too hot or too cold, or when the ecosystem is upset, or when humans introduce disease by touching it. So a lot of people tend to want to touch the coral, you remove the mucus, and then you introduce new diseases. The coral reefs that I saw in 5th grade don't look the same anymore. They look smaller, there's fewer fish. It's pretty depressing to go back, but it's still lovely, and it's something that I always want to cherish. And as you can see in this photo, basically a lot of coral and algae have died, and so they leave behind this white skeleton. Unsurprisingly, there are similar risks for teams too. Extreme changes in expectations is kind of like raising the temperature too quickly. A bad-suited reorg could be like interfering with the ecosystem, and poking too much or being too hands-on can also be like introducing disease. Luckily, going back to my pair programming mishap, that was short-lived. So working with new clients at Pivotal Labs and trying to introduce new change has taught me that you can convince anyone to try something new if you pitch it as an experiment, especially with like some sort of tangible end date. So this is my favorite trick in the box. And the conversation goes something like this. Someone's like, I don't really want to do that. I'm like, why don't we just try it for 2 weeks, and then we'll talk about it after 2 weeks. It's my favorite thing to do. So this works, but it doesn't work unless you find the right way to gather feedback, to make sure that you solicit it, and that you listen to what people have to say. So when I heard the feedback that the pairing wasn't working well, I backed off. And it kind of reminds me of the way I learned to play and fail at Jenga. So the way you play, if you want to build a bigger tower, right? You can't just choose any block you want. You kind of, if no one's looking, because you're not allowed to do this, but if you tap at a bunch of different blocks, you can find the loose one. And then what you want to do is you want to slowly pull it out and like watch the tower and make sure it's okay. And then you like slowly place it on the top. So today, as we write down all the ideas to reflect on and changes that we want to introduce, I invite you to take a pause and remember the game of Jenga. So pick one change that you think is loose enough to try out and slowly place it to the top, wait for the tower to restabilize, and then kind of move forward. The other blocks, I promise you, will be there, and they'll be ready once the tower is stabilized again. So this is kind of like a lesson for me in self-care and burnout too. You want to move all those blocks at once, but you can just go one at a time. They're still going to be there. The last thing that I've been reflecting on is a lot about the ecosystem that I imagine for GitHub Desktop in my dreams. So we're going to do an interactive exercise. I do this as my trademark in every one of my talks. So you are the victims today. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. There's no moving, just closing your eyes. And imagine with me for a second as I ask you a few questions. Nice, y'all are closing your eyes. Okay, so let's imagine the prettiest coral reef that you can think of. So what does that coral reef look like in your mind? Does it have a lot of colors? Is there schools of fish and mammals around it? Going to give you a second to think about it. Okay, now keep your eyes closed, and now let's switch to your team and imagine what you'd like to see. So, does your team have a lot of colors and personalities? Are there lots of schools of thought? Are there people challenging each other or sharing their experiences from papers or past jobs? What do you hear, and what's making you smile the most? Okay, you can open your eyes. So with that vision, I feel like there are a lot of really big things that we can do, and I'm going to share one of the tiny things that I'm practicing as I try to grow my team and enhance the diversity and the lively culture so that I can always start to achieve what I imagine when I close my eyes. Okay, so one thing that I'm practicing right now is paying close attention to who's included, credited, and mentioned when it comes to different media. I do a lot of presentations and team posts, and I've noticed that in my first pass, I tend to only credit the most experienced engineers when I'm providing credit. So this is because I have unconscious biases, and I'm not proud of it. To counteract my bias, I've taken several passes when it comes to Google Calendar invites, when it comes to slide decks, and when it comes to anything I've written. So my first few passes are for noticing if I've left out any sort of credit or people that I tend to leave out. I've found that in these passes I often catch crediting people outside of engineers, because as an engineer I only credit people who look like me, right? Well, there's not that many people that look like me, but you know what I mean. So I often catch those, and then in my second pass, I look and I try to identify if there's anything that I've taken credit for that actually came from someone else. So this is kind of something I'm working with. And I have a story somewhere in my paragraph. Yes, okay, I have a memory ingrained in my head. So actually, when I was up here on stage in February, literally right here, I had done this several passes thing that I do to counteract my biases, and so I was able for my team slide to include design, analytics, PM, support, and all of the different roles. And I noticed that there was someone who was sitting right here in this general area, and they pointed to the slide and they whispered to their peer, who was someone who was included on my slide. And that person looked completely shocked and like, happy shocked, good shocked. So I feel like it was so weird because it's this tiny thing that I did, right? Like they never expected to be included on that slide, and they were shocked that they were. I don't know, tenses are really hard. So I think that this is a small thing that goes a long way, and I think that we can do more. We can direct message our peers the positive feedback that we've heard about them. We can reach out to peers who we think are doing a good job and explain to them why we think they're crucial to the team, more than just saying good job. And I think we can find new ways to give kudos to each other. So if you're practicing like this, like I am, then I have an extra credit activity for you. So in this, after you've done all of this first passes and few passes, notice who's not getting mentioned as much. So this is something that I'm practicing right now, and I can guarantee you that the marginalized people that are on your team hear less positive and constructive feedback, and they need it more. So these tiny actions of giving feedback and credit protect our visions for our teams. All right, so we got some celebrations in store. A lot has changed on our desktop team since I started, and so I kind of wanted to celebrate some victories with you, give you like a little happy ending. So in the last 8 months, we've upped our user research game. We've even had engineers interested in conducting user research themselves. We've started to shift from a roadmap. Well, we've gotten onto a roadmap, and then we've shifted from this roadmap of user features, and we're working on shifting over to user problems, which I'm really, really, really excited about. And we're having the beginning hints of talking about a planning meeting each week, which is like an IPM for pivots. And I'm really excited about this. I want this so badly. So each of these changes has required a lot of big picture research, listening, asking for more context, and being patient to introduce one change at a time. Returning back to our original conversation, I want to stress that just like the coral reef ecosystem, we work on complex teams and in companies that operate in a complex world. So each team is going to have its unique characteristics that might be masked as challenges, but also bring advantages that you can't have otherwise. So we're all here at Paraconf because we want to reflect, learn, and help each other, and we have the power to do that. So treat the coral reef islands that belong to others with care, just like you would your own. Keep your ecosystem vision in mind. Get your hands dirty and have fun. Thank you.